Welcome to We Make Children's Books, the podcast that takes you through the imaginative minds of children's book authors and artists. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com. We're excited to have with us the widely acclaimed and award-winning and highly talented author, illustrator, and songwriter of the Cows Go Moo, Jim Petipas.
All right. Thank you for having me, Barney. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
I should say muchas gracias.
Oh, that's right, because of the moo.
That's right.
Yeah, see? So it was really interesting. So you came out, you have your book, the Cows Go Moo, which, if I did my research correctly, this was initially a song you used to sing to your kids. And then they asked you, they told you years later you should make this into a children's book.
Similar start to that, but It actually started as a skit night at summer camp.
Oh, that's right.
Some buddies and I, it came to skit night, which was probably Friday night at summer camp. We went to a camp called Happy Teen Ranch is what it was called. And skit night came and we said, well, what are we going to do? So we said, let's write a song. And so we got some toilet roll holders and we taped them to our baseball caps. And then we found some surgical gloves in the bathroom or something, that somebody had used for cleaning up. We blew those up, attached them as udders. And then we put cups on our noses with a couple holes in them. And it was a huge hit. So it was called the Cow Song at the time. And years later, from way back, that was, I graduated high school like in 82, but years later, my daughters, when they were quite young, they said, Dad, you should turn that song into a children's picture book. Okay. And I had done a lot of art as a kid. I was kind of more of an introverted kid. I'm kind of a learned extrovert. But I was really into art and music and that kind of a thing. And so I said, I'm going to do it. And so I kind of dragged my feet, like, how am I going to do this picture book thing for probably a couple of years? And then I finally said, I'm going to take a class at Mass Art in Boston on writing and illustrating children's picture books. And so that gave me a process. And even in that class, we had to do a dummy book. So that was like the start, of kind of on my way to publishing my first children's picture book.
So when you took that class, what were some of those aha moments where you were able to say, that makes sense. This is why I'd have to do X and Y with this song. What was some of those?
So I think in that whole process, I was still kind of like, weeding out, I didn't want to take the song just as it was, because I think we only had like maybe 3 or 4 verses, So I said, I'm going to try to add more to it. And as I was working on the lyrics, I was also working on the art. But I actually had to go into the studio and record the song before I was able to finish the book, because we wanted to have the song go right along with the book. So like people can go to my website and download the song for free. And if they have my book or my ebook, they can go right through it page by page, and it goes right along with the whole picture book.
Right. And I saw that. That is amazing. You can actually, so the idea of it, it's almost like, the books when we were children where you'd have like the reader where you'd hear like, the chime to turn the page. But this is actually like a song where you have to, I've watched, there's a lot of videos for those that are interested. You go on YouTube and you type in like the Cows Go Moo book. There are people that actually are doing the sing-along, following it along with the books. And that was amazing. Was that always your plan to do it as a sing-along book?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's always been the plan. Yeah. Yeah. It's similar to like kind of what Pete the Cat does, and Pete the Cat has done pretty well, and, but even I think Pete the Cat probably came up before I started working on it, but it wasn't like I want to like copy Pete the Cat. It was more like, hey, this is kind of where I'm going with this. And then the second song, with my new book, The Cows Go Moo Shuffle, was actually a song that my roommate in college was teaching me how to play guitar. And he came up with this little riff, and he called it the Petipas Shuffle. And so the Petipas Shuffle became this pretty well-known song amongst my friends and actually in our church youth group. That I said, wow, I'm going to use the Petipas Shuffle as my next basis for my next cow book. And so that's where the Cows Go Moo Shuffle came up. And I'm planning on definitely doing a third book and probably more cow related books. But my youngest daughter, Sophia, said, Dad, you should do a book called The Cows Go Metal. And so I like metal music as well. I like all styles of music. And so the next song is actually going to be a heavy metal, kind of a more melodic, not like, really grungy type stuff, but more melodic metal. And then it's probably going to be a tour of the cows kind of going, the West Coast and maybe over to Sweden or, somewhere over there, where metal's pretty big as well.
And so you actually have, like, for those that are interested, there's actually like specific characters here in the cows. There's 5 of them, correct?
Well, there's 5 in the band, but I'm actually up to 12 different characters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you, so there's I think it's right in the very middle spread of my new book. So my new book, it's called The Cows Go Moo, Boston to Austin. And so the cows travel to all the different music cities, all across mostly the East Coast. But so now this is Radio City Music Hall, the Muette. And so the way I developed the book, so you got the 5 members, but then you got all these extra characters that are, part of the book as part of the book as well. But the way I developed the books was I wanted to do a children's book that parents could enjoy as well as the kids, So I kind of thought up and tapped into almost every cow pun that I possibly could find and kind of brought that in. And then I brought in a lot of unique things from different cities all across the world. My first book, the cows are doing a world tour. So they're in Egypt and they're in France and they're at the Great Wall of China and they're all over the place, and also many places in the United States and South America. And but then this book is just Boston to Austin.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And so because you kind of ad hoc, as you mentioned, like the origin story of where the cow song, was this something where before that, have you always had like a love for cows, or was this something now that you have created a love for cows because of that spontaneous moment of writing that song?
It's I don't think I had like this, passionate love of cows. But actually in my first book, I'm doing a second edition of the first book, but in this first book here, it's kind of a little bit dark, but that's me at the age of 7 at my Uncle Vincent's farm up in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. And so there's a bunch of cows in the background here. And then this is more recent, back in 2018 with a Highland cow up in New Hampshire. But so my Uncle Vincent had cows, and then I actually worked on a farm in Hingham, Mass, where I grew up in Hingham, Massachusetts, and we were, working in the hay barn and things like that, and the farmer there paid us like a popsicle a day, for working all day. But then and then it must have been just the cow song that kind of brought it together, in that. So.
No, because so as you mentioned, you've almost in a way of like created this world that it's all anthropomorphic cows in a way. Has there been anybody who says, "Hey, what about horses? What about goats?" Is there some room for this, or that the world you've created, it just does not have room for other anthropomorphic animals?
No, I think I'm going to stick with cows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like somebody said, oh, you could do the horses go neigh or whatever, which I think
Right.
part of that has been done, and the cows go moo has been done as well. I was actually very surprised that I could find the domain, thecowsgomoo.com, and that it was out there. But there's a ton of cow stuff out there. But and there's a lot of children's books about cows as well, so I kind of wanted to do something unique. And you and I were talking earlier that you've done some work with Heifer International. I was reading the book Do Something That Matters by Blake Makowski, and Blake Makowski is the guy that started Buy One Give One Tom's Shoes, right? And I was reading that book and I said, you know what? I want to do something like that with the Cows Go Moo. And so I came up with this idea: buy a book, give a cow. And so we used to do it that 10% of the profits go to Heifer International. But even just this past year, we changed it to a buck a book. So $1 every hardcover book goes to Heifer International. And so we've raised enough. We've raised and we've donated over the last 4 years a cow a year. I'd love to do more, but we haven't sold like a ton of books. We've sold a pretty good amount of books, but we haven't sold, thousands of copies or anything like that. But
Right.
Hopefully someday, because the main goal is I want to celebrate reading, celebrate cows, celebrate giving, celebrate art, and celebrate music, and celebrate, kids and families and, relationships, having fun around all those different elements.
Right. No, so talk to us before we went live. We were kind of showing us around your studio. So your first book, you did this. It was all an analog in the sense it wasn't digital when you made the pictures, correct?
Correct. I did it all with traditional art,
Okay.
so, I sketched them out in my sketch pad, and then I, brought it to a larger, piece of paper. And I had to go out and research all different types of papers and what kind of inks I wanted to use and that kind of a thing. Originally, I was going to do it in watercolor, but I found that with watercolor, I couldn't get the details that I really wanted to get. If you look at, kind of the mice that are there dancing around, I couldn't get the details because the inks would just, the watercolor paints would just bleed into each other. And so, I went to YouTube and I did some research on ink pens, and I came across these things called Copic markers, COPIC markers, and they are just amazing. They're types of pens. And so, I did all the sketching in the pencil, and I went to black inks, and then I went to Copic markers, which you can blend them and the colors and all that. And then my second book, I went to an iPad, and I used the application called Procreate. And which was nice because I could do the work wherever I was, whether I was traveling away from my office, where, anywhere in the world really, and continue working on it. And, my next book is going to be another coloring book. I did a coloring book for my first book called The Cows Go Moo, Utterly Amusing Activity and Coloring Book. And I'm going to do another one for the Shuffle. But I'll be able to just lift the colors out of the application, and I'll have all the dark ink, all the black ink right there, and I'll be able to edit it and move it around to where I want to get the images for my coloring book.
So talk to us a little bit. As you said, you did mention that you do have the Cows Go Moo, the Utterly Amusing Activity and Coloring Book. Was this something that you saw other children's book authors do, or is this something that you've kind of said, I think it needs a activity book with this?
I probably did see other authors do it. Yeah. A lot of times on children's authors' websites, which I've done a lot of research, just kind of seeing what other people do, through this process. My town library, I live in Bedford, Massachusetts, and the town library, I probably checked out about, 10 to 15 children's books every week, and it's kind of a cool thing. You can just kind of choose what you want online, and then they put it together and you just go and pick them up, and so I would learn and see kind of what other authors are doing. And then I would go to different websites. And so there was a lot of authors, particularly, like Pete the Cat, and they all had coloring books and coloring pages, sometimes, free coloring pages. So on my website, if you go to the kids corner, you can download, You can download my songs for free. So with the Kids Corner, we don't have all the coloring pages up there just yet, but we just did one for Valentine's Day and for celebrating Literacy Week. So Reading Rocks. And then there's 2 different versions of the Cows Go Moo up there, the Shuffle and the Cows Go Moo. And then some other coloring pages and activity pages, that are available.
As you said earlier, you are also a musician. How important do you see this as someone that makes children's books and also as a musician? How important is music for literacy for children?
I think it's very important. Obviously it's not a necessity. However, we found that, and people have expressed interest in my books because it has that music element. Sometimes you might read a children's book, and if it doesn't really connect with a kid, they might read it a few times and maybe come back to it. But what people have found with my books, it's been pretty cool, is they'll send me, like you said, videos of them reading it. And they've got it memorized, and they have it memorized because, it has music that goes along with it,
So when it comes to when it came to putting together an activity, making an activity and coloring book, is there some specific formula like like you have like a menu of putting in a coloring page and an activity page, or how did you put that together? And did you have a certain number of pages that that you have to put into that?
Yeah, well, in order to, it all depends on where you want to publish it. So if you want to publish it on Amazon KDP, you need to have at least 100 pages, for that 8.5 by 11 trim size, right? On Ingram Spark, which that's who's publishing my next book. I had done my first book through Mill City Press. They're out in Minneapolis. But after doing a bunch of research and things like that, my first book, I really wanted to make it the highest quality I possibly could. And I'm hoping to achieve that with Ingram Spark as well. But with Ingram Spark on a landscape 11 by 8.5, you can't get a dust cover. And I really wanted to get a dust cover for my first book. I mean, I still have about 1,000 copies left. So if somebody wants an edition of my first book with a dust cover, they'll be able to get it at least for another 1,000 books. But my next round of books are going to, unfortunately, not be with a dust cover. But I've done some unique things with my author page and some other things that I think add to it. And my books come obviously with a chance to give, and they come with a free song and other things that go along with it. Right. But to answer your question, I did a lot of research on coloring books, and some coloring books are 2 pages, 2-sided pages. Some of them have perforation on them, so you can kind of rip them out. Some of them have I could show you this in my coloring book, but some of them have like little test blotches, spots where you can test if your inks are going to bleed through, the pages or not, and things like that. And so my coloring books, there are about 34 pages of images and then blank pages on the back side of every page. So it comes out to be, around 72 pages.
Okay. All right.
That seems like a good amount of coloring pages. And, it ends up being, I think I have a copy. Well, it ends up being about the width of a regular picture book.
Right.
Thing,
You mentioned earlier too that it's important that the rereadability, especially for parents to reread the books, and part of it is having the music in the background, but also looking at some of the comments about the book, that you also have a lot of Easter eggs in your books as well for parents.
Yeah. We were talking about it earlier. I love humor, so humor is another big aspect of all this. And, I think if you can get kids and families, laughing and stuff like that. So a kid might read the Cows Go Moo or the Cows Go Moo Shuffle, and they might not get all the jokes, but my hope is that the parents will, like there's one thing where, the cows are down on, the Boston Public Gardens, and they're in the boats, on the swan boats and that kind of a thing. And I have this cow who's standing off on the side, and he's playing his guitar, and somebody's leaning into his guitar case and dropping some money into his guitar case. And I have a sign on the side and it says cow tipping accepted. You know what I mean? So, like a little kid might not get that, but an adult would. So,
Right.
so there's a lot of stuff like that throughout the books.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you enjoy, what do you enjoy most whether as you're putting this together? Do you enjoy, drawing the cows or putting in like some of like the background, really dressing up the background with putting in little things for people to kind of watch, have their eyes kind of follow along?
I really enjoy almost every aspect. I don't enjoy the marketing as much, and all that, and the selling of the book. But that's hard to. I guess I shouldn't say that too, because I do a lot of, well, pre-COVID, I did a lot of markets and open air events, and in Boston and around Boston, and a lot of school visits, author visits, and things like that. And so since COVID, that's been a little bit slower. I'm just starting to ramp up again. I just started this thing I call Cowapalooza, which is a free online event every fourth Friday. And tomorrow morning is actually my second one. And so it's a free online event that people can get free registration off of my website through eBright. And it's just a half-hour show. And so last week we had an instrument of the week where I introduced an instrument. We read my first book. We sang the first song.
And so it's a Zoom link that someone can go into. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's going to be a Zoom link that attaches. Yep.
Okay. All right, cool. And that's pretty exciting. So then what that involves then, as you say, is like every fourth Friday is Cowapalooza. Last you said about 30 minutes or so, right?
Yep. Yeah, we
Okay.
start right on time and we pretty much end right on time. And that way parents can kind of know, hey, we can have this thing we can do with our kids, for a half hour here. So
Right. And what's usually the age range that you have for this?
for my books and pretty much everything, the Cows Go Moo, that publishers and booksellers want you to kind of pick a target age. So
Right.
I've said 3 to 8, but I've always said young at heart.
Right.
I even did an event for a senior citizens group one time where I read the story, I sang the song, I gave, all the how it started, the history and all that, and they ate it up. It was great fun being with the seniors, and so, and they loved
What skills or tips that would you give a children's book creator that you wished you knew when you made your first book?
Along the way, it took me a long time. It's like, oh man, this is taking longer than I maybe anticipated. Finally, another children's book author who I said, hey, can I take you out to lunch and pick your brain about how you came up with your book? And the best piece of advice that she gave me was 3 words: finish the book. And that was my mantra throughout. I think that those 3 words kept me going and going and going. And then I came up with my own mantra: if I don't get my butt in the chair, I'm never going to finish the book.
Mm,
So just kind of carving out the time. Some people will say set deadlines. Don't set deadlines. I have found that setting a deadline is good. Sometimes if you set your own deadline, you're just going to keep on pushing it out. But I had a publisher, I wanted to get my book to, one of the big, book fairs, the one actually in New York City. And
mm,
so they said, well, if you want to have your book at that book fair, you need to have all the art and everything into the publisher by this date. And so that kind of pushed me to, to finish the book and get it done on time.
mm. And so, and what about your artwork? Was there anything that you wished you did in your first book that you were able to do in your second book, other than using like the Procreate?
Oh, good question. No, I've kind of stuck with kind of the same kind of a feel, with the
Mm,
heavy, the heavy cartoon inks, kind of getting, back to the art a little bit. when I was a kid, I would draw cartoons, but I wouldn't have considered myself a cartoonist, and maybe I don't consider myself a cartoonist right now, but I am a cow cartoonist. Like I can draw, cows almost doing anything, in my books. They're sledding, and they're at the beach, and they're flying kites, and they're in the water, and they're playing in the mud, and they're in the hay, and they're all over. They're in their underwear even, and so so cows are all over the place. So I've kind of developed my own style of drawing cows, but it was a lot of research and practice and kind of getting the cows exactly how I wanted them to look. When I do an event for kids, I'll bring, hey, these are my first sketches of my cows, and they'd be like, those aren't too good, but then I said, well, here's my second drafts, my third drafts, and then finally here's the cover of the book. And you can see a progression. I've always had art skills, but that's why I tell one of my messages to students is, don't let anyone tell you can't do something. If you put more time and effort and all those things, you'll eventually be able to reach your goals. One of the definitions of success is preparation plus opportunity equals success. And, so I did a lot of preparation, and then, I manufactured something, and out of that manufacturing has came, opportunities like doing podcasts like this, and radio things, and going into schools, and, going to farmers markets. And I did a tour with JP Licks ice cream. I went to all the JP Licks ice cream stores around my area and did events, for kids. And, so if my daughters hadn't said, hey, Dad, you should turn that song into a children's picture book, my life wouldn't have been boring necessarily, but this has really opened up a lot of opportunities to do some fun things and really make a difference, striving to make a difference with it.
Right. And now we always talk about children's books always kind of seem to have like some moral or message. So what would, for those that haven't read The Cows Go Moo yet, what would be the moral and message of the book?
You're right. Most children's picture books, they're like patterned after a story, or something that comes out of it. And somebody has asked me this question before, and cows, there's like thousands of different breeds of cows, and and we know, some of them off the top of our head. You got Highland cows, and Hereford cows, and Angus cows, the all black cows, and all those. And so throughout my book, I've tried to, represent all those different types of cows, and we look at our world as, there's all different, different types of people, and these cows all get along, and it would be nice too that we all could get along, and so kind of, bringing joy and laughter and harmony and those types of messages, into my books, is a big part of it. But really, there's no quote unquote moral, kind of message, into it. Apart from celebrating laughter and having fun, Yeah, those are all the different cows, and even my dog has been in both books. That's my dog Earl, and then you're getting a little bit in there to, my Moo merch. I've got a whole line of T-shirts and mugs and all kinds of things that I sell on my website as well.
Now, where did the names of the cows come from? Are they named after real cow names, or are they something that you kind of came up with as you made the book?
Well, the cow song started with the group of friends from summer camp, and we were just a group of friends from the church youth group, and somehow we became known as the Beakers, and I was actually known as King Beak. And being a drummer, I took Beaker, who's kind of the main character in my books. I named him Beaker. Willie, who is an Angus cow. I named him after Will Farrell, because of my
Okay.
love for the
The
cowbell stand,
cowbell.
you know, and then Sedgwick, Nellie. I tried to also incorporate kind of common names for cows.
Okay.
Bessie, Holly cow comes off of the kind of the phrase holy cow.
Right.
You know, um,
So talk to us a little bit about, as you mentioned too, you've kind of created like an entire, like a community around this where you're just, it's all, as you mentioned, it has a cow themed, and it's all, um, children's related cow themes. But talk to us a little bit about, as you mentioned earlier, about the marketing piece to it. How important is it to, put together, as you say, like the moo wear and some of your toys and stickers?
yeah, I developed that from the beginning.
Okay.
Just I wanted to take the art and put it on clothing, so that we'd have some of the characters, and we got a Moo Crew T-shirt, part of the fan base. You sign up for the newsletter and you're part of the Moo
Mhm.
Crew, and
The
and,
newsletter.
and all that. And I got the more cowbells T-shirt, and all that. So when I go to events, I have a lot of T-shirts, and then I contacted cowbell.com, and I bought some cowbells, and we put my stickers on the cowbells. you
Oh, that's
know
awesome.
so it's just kind of another way. I haven't sold a ton of all this Moo merch, but it's just kind of another way to expand kind of, what's going on, with the brand.
Right.
So basically, I'm not just developing a children's picture book, which is awesome, but I'm developing a brand, and so
Okay.
the Cows Go Moo is that brand, and expanding into multiple different things.
Right. Yeah. So what do you wish you knew in your first book that you now know when you made your second book?
Just the amount of resources that are out there,
Mm,
that you can tap into. After I created my first book, or I came pretty close to finishing it up, I came across a guy by the name of Jake Parker and Will Terry. And these guys, they have they're storybook illustrators, and they also
mm.
teach on the college level about how to write and illustrate children's picture books. But
Oh,
they
I
are
know.
fantastic. They do a number of different um,
Mm,
tutorials on writing and illustrating children's picture books, from the marketing to the drawing to the producing, and the printing, and all those types of things. So that wasn't available to me until I had finished my first book. So going
right.
into my second book,
Okay.
and so going into my second book, that, again, it gave me even an expanded process on how to do this thing called children's picture booking.
What are some things that you've learned that are very specific to making a children's book that don't exist in, say, other mediums?
Hmm. For what they taught me, a lot of it had to do with the art. So
Mm,
a lot of children's book authors, they author a story, and then they go out and find an illustrator. And if they want to add a song to it, they go out and find a musician. Thankfully, I had all those abilities, and I was able to expound on those types of things. I'm
right.
also part of a children's picture book um, uh, roundtable that meets here in Massachusetts. And so you come up with your script and your story. For me, it was a set of lyrics that would be for outlined for a book, and we got together, and everyone would pitch their books to each other, and then we would get feedback from each other. And that was another great thing that I would strongly encourage people to get a part of. And probably every community across the country and maybe the world has those type of roundtable picture booking type feedback opportunities. And I would even get ideas from them, like, hey, that's a great idea, I'm going to put that in my book. And so that was fantastic as well. But for SVS Learn, Jake Parker and Will Terry's group, it was mostly about like, how does light enter into the picture, and that every page should have a foreground, a midground, and a background, and your darkest, richest colors are going to be in your foreground, and then it gets a little bit lighter as you work in your midground, and then your background can even be a little bit blurry, and your colors are a lot lighter. And so what that's going to give you is going to give you your depth in your artwork, and so that's something that I learned more so for my second book than I did for my first book.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. And so, and we mentioned, so your second book is, as of this recording, has yet to be released, but will be released soon.
A matter of fact, I had a printing issue where I was working with a printer outfit out in California, and they were going to be my distributor, and they were going to, take my plush. I have a plush cow too. Beaker is a plush cow that is part of my stuff as well. And, so I shipped out books, I shipped out my plush cow, and unfortunately, the quality of the book that I wanted to try to achieve with them, they couldn't achieve. And so, so they're in the process of actually sending back the 200 plush cows and the 500 books that I shipped to them to distribute for me through through my website and through Amazon and all that. So, I did some research, I did some backpedaling a little bit, and, I landed on producing it and publishing it through Ingram Spark,
Right.
and in this process, I also started my own publishing company. It's called Boardwalk Books LLC, and we have a cottage down in Cape Cod in Sandwich, Mass, and there's a boardwalk there. It's actually one of the 10 most famous boardwalks in the country.
Huh.
And it's a place where, just our family has always celebrated being together and boating and, floating down the river and jumping off the boardwalk. And so that's where that kind of came up. And there's a great artist community in Sandwich, Massachusetts, called the Sandwich Arts Alliance. And so I've become a big part of that, doing events and selling all my books down there. We actually just came out with a book called Boardwalk Book, and it celebrates the boardwalk. And one of the fundraisers we did down there is we had Adirondack chairs. And so my Adirondack chair, a picture of my Adirondack chair is in the book. And in relation to what we're talking about, I took all my many of my characters, the cows are jumping off the boardwalk into the ocean, and it came out really good. And somebody came and bought it at the auction for like $850, which was pretty cool.
Right. And so you're also going to be working on a graphic novel as well.
Yeah, so I've always had this idea of doing. I don't read a ton of graphic novels, but the ones I've read, I've really enjoyed. And there's an author by the name of David Smalls, and he wrote a book called Stitches. He just came out with another book too about, and they're all tend to be autobiographical or biographical about his family. And my parents got divorced when I was in the 5th grade, and it was pretty rocky, probably, all of 3rd and 4th grade. Leading up to that, they finally got a divorce, and my dad actually became a homeless person, and he traveled all over the country, city to city, job to job. But eventually became an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he was in and out of jail, and all kinds of unbelievable stuff, near death type things and all that. And I would try to help him. But I think I became an enabler at times, in his life. But there was a period of time where I said, Dad, you know what? I can't help you anymore. And it was actually the time that I went off to seminary to become, to study, to become a youth pastor. And during those 3 years, I had no contact with him. I didn't know where he was living. He had actually attempted to take his life twice previous. And when I got out of school and I started working at a church, I said, you know what? I'm going to go find my dad. And I found out, he was living up in Calais, Maine, as far north as you can go on the East Coast. And I found out he was living in Key West, Florida. And, so a buddy of mine and I said, let's go down and find him. Mm. And so we left messages. I found out what his post office box was because he was getting his Social Security check down there. And so, long story short, 3 days went by. My buddy Mike and I were searching for him, by boat, by jet ski. We were out on the islands. We were going to AA meetings. We were all over the place showing his picture and everything. And we didn't find him, leaving messages in his post office, say, hey, we'll meet you here at 12 o'clock. We'll meet you here at 2 o'clock. Finally, on day 3, we had made plans to go snorkeling off of a catamaran. And my dad was actually an old scuba diver. And so that afternoon, there he was in the Winn-Dixie parking lot. And he had a beard down to here and hair down to here. And he was all dressed in black and he was covered with bug bites. And he stunk more than any human being that I've had opportunity to smell. And right. I ran to him and I gave him a hug. And the name of the book is called Jimmy Bojangles, because that was his nickname when he was in prison. And Jimmy Bojangles, the prodigal dad, and he had been living in the woods right behind Winn-Dixie for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And because he couldn't be in society because, the alcohol would just, take the most of him. And, so there's a whole bunch more to the story, but we had 3 more years where we reconciled our relationship, and he reconciled his relationship with most, if not all, of his family. And so I hope to write that story. Right.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like it's going to be a really good story too.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
My goal with the story is for people to not give up on their parents, not give up on relationships, and hope and pray that, someday, reconciliation, can happen,
Right.
And a lot of that, we haven't talked about this, but when I'm not doing books and I'm not playing drums in a band and I'm not, I'm an adolescent and family counselor. And so a lot of the things that I've experienced and the things of working with teenagers since I was a teen have kind of led me to do the work that I do as an adolescent counselor. And it's very rewarding, very challenging. And particularly since COVID, emotional struggles and issues have, kind of skyrocketed. And so I don't have to advertise, people find me, and it's a privilege to be able to help teenagers through difficult experiences in their life.
So what's next for you is that you're waiting for your second book to come out.
Yep.
You're working on a graphic novel. You're also working on a third book with the cows. So you have a lot going on, Jim.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. My wife would wish it. My wife would hope it would make more money for our family, but my counseling kind of feeds my habits, and
right.
kind of a thing. But thankfully, we have the opportunity. I have the opportunity to do this.
Right. Perfect. Well, thanks a lot, Jim. And listen, come back on when you get your other book coming out. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. I really appreciate it. And I know you live up in Vermont, and I looked up a statistic that that Vermont has the highest per capita cow to human than any other part in the country, and it's 1 cow for every 3.8 humans.